Today we'll add JWT Authentication, Authorization, and Swagger support to a .NET 6 minimal API. So let's get coding. Okay, so the very first thing that we want to do is open up Visual Studio 2022, create a new project. That's going to be an ASP.NET Core empty. If you can't find it, search it in this search bar, and then click Next. Give your application a name. Mine is going to be minimal JWT and a location, and click Next. And then in the framework, choose .NET 6 and leave configure for HTTPS as it is, and then click Create. Okay, as we're here, let's close out of this one and double click on the minimal JWT project, so the CS project file, and let's quickly remove the nullable attribute so that we can get rid of all the errors or all the wordings that are going to appear in this project. And then that's it with this step. Following, we need to add a data transfer. We need to add a few data transfer objects. As our application will be a movie management application, we need to create a few models or data transfer objects in this case that are going to hold the data that we're going to basically transfer from the client to the server and to our virtual database. And those are going to be the user model that's going to hold all the user details such as first name, last name, user security role, username and password, and the email as well. And we're going to create a user login, which is just going to hold the username and the password, or the email and the password. And then last but not least, the movie model, which is going to hold the title, the description, and the rating of the movie. So let's go ahead and create a new folder right here and call this models. And then the first one that we're going to create, so create new class, and this is going to be the user login. So this is simple. Again, a username as a string and then a password as a string as well. The next one on our list is the user model. So right click, add new class, and then call this user, just user. Okay, so very simple. Username as a string, email address, password, given name, surname, and the security role. So that's pretty much it. It's not too large. It's a pretty decent DTO. And then last but not least, the movie model. So here we are. We have an ID as an integer, a title as a string, a description as a string as well, and then last but not least, the rating as a double. So that's pretty much it with this step. Next up on our list is to add a few data repositories. And because we're not going to work for the purposes of this tutorial with any sort of database, we're going to simulate that database in a couple of static classes. One is to hold a couple of users with different security roles, and one is to hold a simple list of movies. So let's go ahead and create those two repositories. So create a new folder inside your project and call that repositories. And then inside that, add a new class. Again, this is a simple class, and then call this user repository. Obviously, if you have an EF Core, a SQL Server database, or any sort of database, this step is not mandatory, it's optional. So you can just query your database instead of doing this. Okay, so like I said, this is a simple class, and here we're just creating a simple list of users, and we're newing up with a couple of users. So one is look admin, and it's got an email address, a first name, a surname, and then a password. The password is, as you can see, is the same for both users. And then we've got a standard user. So the first one is Luke is an administrator, and then Lydia is a standard user. So this is really important when we're going to implement authorization inside our minimal API. So let's control dot on this user, and let's import this namespace so we're all good to go. Okay, following is the movie repository. So again, right click, add a new class. And then this is going to be called movie repository, and hit enter. So obviously I've already prepped the static list of movies with 5 titles that we're going to work with. So first one being Eternals, Dune, The Harder They Fall, Red Notice, and No Time to Die. So basically I just took this off on IMDb page. And then they've got a title, a description, and a rating. and an ID as well. So let's import the movie namespace, and yeah, that is it with this step. Okay, so following is creating the services. So we're going to have two services. One is the user service and one is the movie service. The user service is just going to hold a simple get method that's going to get our current user. So passing in the user login as a parameter that's going to hold the two properties that we've just created, the username and the password, and it's going to return back a user model if the user is found by username and password. So let's close everything down, let's collapse everything, and right click on your project and add a new folder and call that services. Okay, so right click on the services folder and add a new item, because this is going to be first an interface. So we'll do an interface, the service, and an implementation for every single method. So user service. Okay, so this is only going to hold a get method. So let's import the models, and that is it. So let's do the let's create the implementation class. So add a new class and call this user service, and let's implement this method. Okay, let's first inherit from our interface, and let's define the method, the implementation method. So this is going to return a user, so all the user details, and it's going to take in the user login, so the email and the password, and obviously it's going to go ahead and try to find first or default by username, obviously if it's equal to the login username that's passed in, as well as the password. So if both of them match, then return the user. So let's control dot on this red lines, and let's import the specific namespaces. Okay, so very simple. Again, if you've got authentication already implemented in your application, it's obviously use the framework exposed methods that you've got at hand. Obviously don't do this, but this is just an example, so we can retrieve the information from the user repository from the two users that we've created for us. This is just for simplicity of this tutorial. It's not best practice to store your users in like a static class, rather in a database using identity server and whatnot. Okay, following on our list is the movie service. So again, this is going to have an interface and an implementation class. So let's go ahead and create them really quick. If this tutorial is helpful to you, hit that like button so that this video can spread to as many people as possible. I would really appreciate it. Right click on the services, add new item, interface. This is going to be called movie service. Really quick, the create method, the get method, the list, update, last but not least, the delete. So again, this is to follow the CRUD pattern that is create, read, update, and delete. Let's import the namespaces real quick. Yes, we're good to go. Let's create the implementation class. Right click, add new class. This is going to be called movie service. Okay, so let's first inherit from our newly created interface, and let's implement the methods. So the first one on our list is the create method. That's going to return a movie object, and obviously it's going to take in a movie parameter. So let's define the ID, because obviously on the client side we won't going to know the ID. So we go into movie repository, get a count, and then increment that by 1. So if we have, in our case, we have 5 movies. The count will be 5. The next one, the next movie that we're going to create, and append to our list is going to have a 5 + 1 ID, so it's an ID of 6, and so on. So let's after we've defined the ID, let's add that movie to our list and return the movie. Then following is the get method. So that's just taking in an ID and returns a movie object. So in this case, we go in the movie repository and we select first or default by ID. Nothing new here. If we don't find it, return null. And if we find it, we just return the movie. So next one, is to return the list of movies, and this is probably the simplest one that we're going to create. So this is just returning the entire list of movies from our repository as it is. So return movies, as I said, and then update. This is taking in a movie object, so the new version of the movie that we want to update. And then the first thing that we do is we get a snapshot of the old movie as it is right now by ID, by the ID of the new movie that we want to update. So if we didn't find that, then return null. Otherwise, update the title, the description, and obviously the rating. And then that is pretty much it. This is how we update those properties, and then we return the movie object. Last but not least, in our movie service is the delete, and that takes in an ID and finds the old movie by ID. And then as soon as it's if it's not found, obviously return false, because this returns a bool. True if the operation has been successful, and false if otherwise. So if the old movie is not found, then return false. Otherwise, just remove the old movie from the repository and then return true. One thing that I would like to do is to import this couple of namespaces, the repositories and the models namespace. So we are good to go with this movie service implementation class. Okay, so in order to generate and use JWT or JWT Authentication in our application, we need to install three very important dependencies. Okay, so the first package that we're going to install is called Microsoft ASP.NET Core Authentication.jwt Bearer. So let's install the latest stable version. Obviously, accept all the licenses, and then is Microsoft Identity Model Tokens. Okay, install this one too. Okay. And then last but not least is the identity models, system identity model .token.jwt. Okay, so let's install this one too, the latest stable version. Okay, this is it with installing the dependencies necessary to generate and authenticate in our minimal API with the JWT token. Okay, I just wanted to let you know that I post weekly tutorials just like this one about .NET and coding in general. So if you are interested, subscribe and join our club. Okay, so following, let's set up the endpoints for our minimal API inside program.cs. So if you expand the project and then double click on program.cs, so here it is, very simple what we've got. The builder. That's defined as web application.create builder, and then we've got builder.build obviously to create the app, and then we map the get method that sits at the root of our application, and it should return just a simple string with message 200 that says hello world. And then we do map.app.run. So what I would like to do next is to set up the CRUD API methods to expose the functions that we have created as part of the movie service. So we've got, if I do Control M, Control O, I collapse to the definitions of these functions. So I've got create, get, list, update, and delete. So in here, we will be creating endpoints like this to expose those methods. But before we do that, it is really important to register our services so that we can use them inside our minimal API through dependency injection. This allows us to use the services without having to instantiate them or new them up every time we want to use them in the method. We just use them through dependency injection. So we initialize them once per application lifecycle, and we have the same state throughout the application lifecycle. So this is how we do it. We first need to add endpoints API Explorer, and then we add singleton. So this is how we do it. Builder.services.add singleton, and this takes in two generic types. The first one being the interface, in our case is the iMovie service, and the second one is the implementation of that interface. So let's import the services namespace so we can get rid of the errors, and then we register the iUser service as well. So now that we have these two registered, we can go ahead and create the actual endpoints, because we'll need to reference these ones as the parameters for our endpoints. Okay, so the first method in our list is the create method. So this allows us to create a movie inside our static list of movies. And this is pretty simple. We map post, so we do a map post because this will be a post method, obviously. And we've defined a route to /create. This takes in a movie object in the body as in the JSON format. So this is how you would do it. And also this takes in a movie service because we'll be using the service to obviously to call the create method inside the movie service right here. So that is the map create. Let's actually import. So if you do control that, you'll be able to add the minimal JWT.models namespace. So don't worry, the create method doesn't exist yet. We'll be creating that as soon as we map all the API endpoints. The following method is the get method, and this is pretty simple. It's a map get, obviously. Takes in an ID of type integer and the movie service again, and calls a local function called get and passes in those two arguments. The following method is the list method, and this is pretty simple. /list, this is still a map get, and it only takes in the movie service, so you don't need to worry about it. We won't pass it through the request. It will be injected automatically by .NET Core, and calls the list function that we haven't yet created. And then we've got the update, which takes the new version of the movie. So we're going to update an already existing movie record that we've got, and we're going to pass in the new version of the movie, be that with a changed title or a changed description or an updated rating. And then again, the movie service, that's part of every single endpoint that we've created so far, and calls in a local function update that passes in those two arguments. Last but not least is the delete method, and this is /delete, and this is a map delete. Oh, one thing that I forgot to mention is that the update is mapped to a put method. So this is how we map a put HTTP method. So yeah, getting back to the delete method, this is a map delete and takes in an ID because we're just passing in the ID of the movie that we want to delete, and we just go ahead and delete it. So now let's create the actual functions that we have defined right here, but we haven't yet created. The first method is the create method, and obviously again this takes in a movie in the body and the movie service. So this is how we do it. We define the result as a service.create, so we call the service.create method, which is right here, and obviously here we've already discussed what this method does, and as soon as we've got the result, we just return it in an OK result message. One thing to note right here is that previously we would just do OK, and then we wrap the result in an OK message or not found or whatnot. But whereas in here, what we do results.OK, because this function returns an iResult object. So this is what the minimal API returns, an iResult. Then following, we've got the get method. This takes in an ID and the service, and this just simply gets the ID. And if the movie that's returned by ID is null, in other words, if the movie is not found, then return not found. And then if it's found, then obviously return the movie. Following the list method, by the way, all these functions return an iResult. It doesn't matter the type of object that we are going to be returning. It returns an iResult because the result of the function that we're creating, we're wrapping that in an iResult. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so the list method again returns an iResult, takes in a service. This is the simplest one of all. Just takes a snapshot of all the items in the list and returns them back to the API. Then we've got the update. So we just define the updated movie as service.update because we encapsulate all that updating logic inside this update function right here. Yeah. So then in here, the updated movie, if it's null, in other words, if it's not found. So right here, we've got the old movie that we're returning by ID. And if that old movie is not found, then return null. So here we're checking if it's null, then return results dot not found with a message of movies not found. Otherwise, return the updated movie. Last but not least is the delete. Takes in an ID, of course, and just calls the service method service.delete and passes in the ID. And if the result is false, then return a bad request. Otherwise, return true in an OK message. So this is how we are implementing these methods. As you can see, one important thing to note is the fact that we are using a dependency injection right here. So here is how we register the services, and then here is how we make use of them. Don't worry, I'll show you how to call these methods to consume these API endpoints. And you'll see that the app will just make the difference between the body of the request and what's supposed to be injected by .NET Core or the query parameters. So it will take care of that by itself. You'll see what I mean in a moment. Okay, so in order to be able to test these, we've got a few options available. We either test all of these endpoints using Postman like we did previously, or we install Swagger or Swashbuckle. So this is how we do it. Let's do the second one. We right-click on the packages. So that's under the project, dependencies, expand the dependencies, and right click on the packages and click manage new get packages. And in here, let's browse for swashbuckle.ASP.NET Core and install the latest stable version. But at the time of recording this tutorial, it's 6.2.3. 6.2.3. Okay, so as soon as that is installed, let's save, let's expand and make sure that we've actually got this right here with all its dependencies. Okay, then after the package is installed, we come back to program.cs and we do so right under builder, we do builder.services.add_swagger_gen. So this is to enable Swagger in our application. Then following, right after the app, right after the app is defined, where it says builder.build. So in our case on line 12, we do app.useSwagger. So last but not least, right at the end of the function, right at the end of the file, sorry, we do right before we do app.run, we do app.useSwagger UI. So this is how we set up a Swagger in our application. Let's run it and let's see what we've got so far. Okay, so here is our application in browser. So if we go in the URL and we put /swagger, let's see all our endpoints. So there we go. We've got all of our endpoints right here, and we've got the create, the get, the list, the update, and the delete. Let's run the list method and let's see what it returns back. So as you can see, we've got a response body, and we've got all of our movies nicely returned. Let me zoom in a bit so you can so this is readable from your end. And let's see, these are all the titles. Let's actually run the get method with an ID of 2. So there you go. We've got the movie title right here. Let's do a delete, and that's it. Cool. This returned true, and then let's run the list again, and let's see if 2 has been deleted. So as you can see, we've got ID 1 and then movie with the ID of 3. So obviously number 2 has been skipped. So following, what we want to do now is add JWT authentication, so JWT Bearer Authentication into our Swagger application, because as you could see previously, we can go ahead, we're not authenticated, and we could go ahead and delete every single movie that we've got in the list. And if you can imagine this as being like a real application where you expose like real movies from a real database, you don't want to allow anyone to or everyone to come here and play around with the data. So they can obviously see a list of movies. So if you go on IMDb, you can see the list of movies and maybe like get more details about the movie, but obviously not everyone can go ahead and update or delete movies, because that would be chaos. So in order to do that, in order to prevent certain users or not authenticated users to access these specific endpoints that expose our data, we will be implementing JWT authentication. So that's what we'll do right now. Okay, so the first thing that I would like to do is to actually define a new section in appsettings.json. That file can be found in the root of your project. Double click on it and open it up. So I'll add a new section right here called JWT with a bunch of properties. So this is the key that we'll be using to encrypt our JWT token. And I've generated this with like an online generator tool. It's just a random string of letters and numbers. Then the next one is the issuer and the audience. And what this is the address for our issuer and the audience, which in our case is just the same. So we'll be using that to validate the requests that we'll be sending through our API. So that is pretty much all I'm doing. If you're wondering how I got this, it's just the URL of our application, which is right here. So localhost. This will obviously, as soon as you deploy this on a particular server, this will change in your pipeline settings with your release. You will change these values right here, or potentially the issuer and the audience only. But for the purposes of this tutorial, this does the trick, and locally this is what we need to do. So as soon as you've done that, we can close out of that. Okay, so getting back to program.cs, the first thing that we want to do is do builder.services.add authentication, and we do this below the below where we create the builder, obviously. So here is where we define all of our services. I've put this below add Swagger gen. So we do builder services add authentication, and then we define JWT Bearer defaults.authentication scheme. So let's import namespaces and the namespaces necessary for defining JWT authentication inside our application, and they are right here. We do authentication.bearer and then identity model.tokens that we'll need to work around with JWT token. Last but not least, the system.text to be able to encode the actual key. Okay, so let's define some options to this add JWT bearer function right here. So this is how we do options, and then we define the delegate, which is option.token validation parameters, and we define that as a new token validation parameters object. And inside of that, we've got a few properties that we need to define. The first one is to validate the actor and the audience. Then we need to validate lifetime and validate issuer signing key. So all of these need to be set to true because we need to validate the signing key so that we know it's not being tampered with, so that the message is actually secure, is coming from a secured, from a trusted source. And then we need to validate the issuer. And here is where the issuer is grabbed from. It's returned from the appsettings.json from the issuer value that we have defined right there. And then we validate the audience. In our case, both of these are the same, but this is good because if you ever want to deploy this into production, you actually redefine the issuer and the audience based on where your issuer and audience are deployed. Yeah, and then we define the issuer signing key, which is a symmetric security key, and we grab the JWT token key from the appsettings.json. So you remember that random string of letters and numbers that I've generated on a website, on a random website on the internet, and we grab that, we encode it, and then we create a symmetric security key with it. And then we do services.authorization. Following, right after the app is defined, I've put this under app.useSwagger. We do app.useAuthorizations and app.useAuthentication. The use authorization and use authentication, we'll be using that to add authentication and authorization to our endpoints, obviously. So let's do that right now. Okay, so now that we have defined a way for the API to validate each and every API request based on the JWT token, we now need to allow the users to actually log in and have that JWT token generated, because the process is like this. You log into a system, you've got a token generated for you. That token is returned back to the client and is stored inside the browser under the form of a cookie. And then every time you make a subsequent request to the API, then that JWT token is sent along with the request. So now we need to create a login method that will generate that token for us. So we come down here and we do a map post, and I've put that as the second method under the hello world. It really doesn't matter where you put it as long as it's after the app has been defined and after you do app.run, before you do app.run. So right along with the rest of the API methods that we've created. And that's got a root of login/login, and it's got a map post, and it takes in a user login. Again, this user login is just the username and the password, and then the user service that's injected, and it calls a login method that we've not yet created, but we're going to create right now. So let's go down here. This method returns an I result, and it takes in again the user as username and password, and the service that's injected. So if both the username and the passwords are not null, then we're free to go ahead and authenticate the user. So we grab the login user from the service, doing the service.get and passing in the user credentials. So again, all this method does is just it goes in our list of users and grabs the first or default by username and password where they match, where the username and password match. So if the logged in user is not null, well, if the user is not found, then return not found. So if the logged in user is null, return not found. Otherwise, go ahead and do this. So let's create some claims right here. So claims are just pieces of information about the user, such as the username, the email, the first name, last name, and also the security roles. So these are bits of information about a user that we can encode. We can append to the JWT token so that they can be easily accessed inside the API. So the first one is the name identifier. So these are predefined registered claims. If you haven't seen my JWT Authentication basics, then make sure to take a look at that after this video. So basically, we're defining the username, the email address as the claim types .email. The given name, the surname, and the security role. So basically, you need to add these two usings right here: the identity model tokens.jwt and security claims. With these two ones, you'll be able to do everything that we've done so far. Then the next thing is to actually generate the token. So we're defining the token as new JWT security token. The first part is the issuer. So you'll see that this is pretty similar to the part where we've actually done this. The first part is the issuer, and we're grabbing the address of the issuer from the configuration from appsettings.json. Then we've got the audience. Then we're defining the claims that we've already declared right here at the top. So we're just passing that array through. Then we say when it expires. I've put here 60 days because, hell, we don't want this to expire yet. But in an application, you want this to be like 15 minutes. So you want this to expire in no more than like 50 minutes. Then, not before, of course, UTC now. And then we define the signing credentials. And again, this signing credentials will take in a new object, a new instance of the symmetric security key that's just grabbing the configuration key from appsettings.json, and everything inside here. And again, the signing credentials, well, one thing that I forgot to mention is actually defining the hashing algorithm, and in this case is SHA-256. And then we define the token string by doing JWT security token handler dot write token, and we're passing in the token with all the properties that we've defined right here. So As soon as we've got the token string, then we can return that in an OK result message. So that's how we expose the login method, and we allow users to actually log in and have a token generated for them. One thing that I would like to mention that's really important is the fact that this is not actually proper authentication. So obviously, this is just as an example to be able to leave this tutorial as condensed as possible. This is not focused on authenticated the user that exists in the actual database. So this simulates the presence of a proper authentication process. This is just to allow us to generate this particular token. You would obviously want to replace this with like Duende identity model or something similar, where you've got a proper authentication process in place. But for the purposes of this tutorial, this would do it. Okay, so let's take a step back for a second. We've got two types of users. We've got an administrator and we've got the standard user. So what we'll do, we'll restrict some of the API methods so that only administrators can access it, and some of them, which in this case will be the get, will restrict it so that only the standard user can access it. In our application, the login method will allow anonymous. So in this case, we won't put any sort of authentication and authorization on it, because any user will need to access this method without being authenticated. So the first thing we do is inside the map post, inside the create method, we add this authorize attribute. So inside this create method, we do authorize. We add this attribute inside of here. So you could have went away with just doing authorize, but in our case, we want to actually define the authentication scheme as being JWT Bearer Defaults.authentication scheme. And this method will only allow administrators to access it. So in essence, if you're not authenticated, it should return a 401 saying you're not authenticated. However, if you are authenticated, but you are not an administrator, or you are a standard user, then it will say for a 3, it's forbidden. So you are authenticated, okay, fine, but you're not able to access this specific endpoint. So following, let's add a similar thing to the get method, and we've defined again the authentication scheme as Bearer defaults, and the roles we've defined the administrator and the standard role. So again, you could have went away with just defining the authorize like this, because we've only got 2 security roles, so we're saying allow only these security roles to access this endpoint. Following, the list method will remain unchanged. So let's say we can allow everyone regardless of whether they're authenticated or not. So we won't put anything in there, but for the update, let's actually allow only administrators to update. Same for the delete. So that's the same sort of logic as for the update and for the create. So this is how we implement authentication and authorization in a minimal API. Let's actually run the application. Let's see what we've got so far. Okay, if we head over to Swagger, then if we scroll down, we have the login method. So let's try this out. The request body should be, let's actually just copy paste so we can make sure that we don't make any typos, and the password should be this, and let's execute this. And let's see what we've got. Okay, so this is the response body with the token that's been generated for us. Let's look at some other method that's simple to test, and let's try to execute this, and let's see what we've got. And there we go. We've got a response status of a 401 that basically means you are not authorized to access this. But here comes a question. How do you actually test API endpoints with Swagger? Because we actually have a token that's been generated for us based on our username and password. So we're successfully authenticated. We've got a token generated for us. But how do we actually test these endpoints if we're not able to get through the authentication wall? Well, that's what we'll be doing now. Back in our application, where you see builder.services.add_swagger_gen, inside these parentheses, what we'll do, we'll define some options. So here is how we'll configure Bearer for Swagger. So we'll do options.add security definition, and inside that method we'll define a few properties. So this is a bit convoluted, but bear with me because this is how we actually configure JWT Bearer for Swagger. This is how to do it in .NET 6. So we do Open API security scheme, and inside here we define the scheme as Bearer, the bearer format as JWT because this is JWT token, and we need to define that inside the header, and the name should be authorization with a description of saying bearer authentication with JWT token. It's up to you how you put the name and the description though. Then we need to define the type as security scheme type.http. And following that, we need to define the options.add security requirement. So inside those parentheses, we do new Open API security requirement. And obviously, feel free at any point to pause and copy and paste this. But also, I'll have this entire project linked up on GitHub completely for free. So make sure that you go ahead and you clone the repo and you can contrast and compare with your progress and with what you've got. So don't worry if I'm going too fast. Go ahead and copy the code from GitHub. So we do new open security scheme, and then inside here we define the references, the reference as new open API, a reference with an ID of bearer, a type of security scheme, and last but not least, here as the second part of this, we define a new list of strings. So let's actually add all the needed references, and I'm assuming that is pretty much it. So yes, like I said, this is a bit convoluted, but this is how you actually enable Bearer Authentication in Swagger. So let's run this app again. If you haven't already typed everything out, just make sure that you pause the video and you copy everything that's right here. Okay, so inside our application, let's do /swagger, and here you can see an authorize button right here. With a title of bearer and bearer authentication, description of bearer authentication with JWT token. We haven't got a token yet defined, but what we can do, we can go ahead and have one defined for us. So again, let's go to the user repository. Let's grab Lux admin. Let's actually try this out. So the username being Lux admin and the password being this one. So we have a token generated for us, and let's copy that without the double quotes, and let's go up to authorize and let's paste that in there and click authorize and close out of this one. So let's try the delete again and let's see what we've got so far. We've put an ID of 2, and there you go, we've got a response body of true. So let's grab a list because this is not doesn't require authentication, and as you can see, ID number 2 doesn't exist. So we are authenticated. Okay, one other thing that I would like to try is actually access the same delete endpoint with Lydia. That's just a standard user. So let's log out. Yeah, going to the authorize button and clicking log out, and let's log in again with Lydia and with the same password for simplicity purposes, and let's execute. So let's grab this token that's been generated with Lydia's details, and let's paste that in there, and going back to the delete method, let's choose a different one and execute. And as you can see, we've got a response status of 403. That is because if we go back in our application, the delete method right here, it's only allowing the administrators to access it, whereas Lydia is a standard user. So if we try to access the get method, I believe is for both of them. The get method will allow Lydia to get the details. One last thing that I would like to add to this tutorial is the fact that you can actually add more description to your endpoints or to actually exclude them. So in this case, we have this pretty useless hello world map get. So what we can do is we can actually leave this so it can still be accessed by the application, but we can exclude it description. So this is how we would do it. And also the login method, we can actually specify the fact that it accepts type of user login, and the request that's passed in, the body that's passed in, is of type application/JSON. And also it produces a string, because we are returning back a string that's actually that represents the JWT token. And in the case of create, it accepts a movie that's an object, so that's the object that the movie that we want to create, and it produces a movie with the status code of 200 with the content type of application.json. Though these are optional. If this should always return a status of 200, then these are optional, but I've just put there just for demonstration purposes. Then in the case of get, it just produces a movie. And then for the list, again, it produces a list of movies. So this is pretty similar for the rest of the methods. So in the case of update, it accepts a movie type, and then it returns back. It produces, in other words, a movie object, so a movie type. Minimal API is generally for small applications or prototyping, but if you're interested in building an enterprise CRUD API controller in .NET 5, check out this video. Until next time, stay safe.